class, it's Wednesday, April 15th, and we're going to go ahead and finish our reading of Pioneers to the West. It'll be pages 26 to 30, and then we will head into reading The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane starting tomorrow. So let's go ahead and finish up this reading. So while we're reading, I want us to go ahead and think about how the author connects the story of each young pioneer to the larger topic of westward migration, right? And we've talked about what westward migration means. It means the movement west from the East Coast, where we initially settled as a nation, and then the movement to California and Oregon and Washington, the whole West Coast. So let's listen to page 26 through 30 of Pioneers to the West, which will review what we have read and make connections based on that. And as we're reading, I want us to go ahead and think about, why did settlers follow trails when journeying to the West? And that talks a lot about this map that you'll see in the reading. But I want you to be thinking about, why would settlers follow these trails? From Sea to Shining Sea. In 1845, a U.S. magazine writer said it was his country's manifest destiny, or fate, to stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. By the end of the 1800s, that dream came true, as western lands were settled and turned into new U.S. states. Number crunching. From 1850 to 1896, 15 new states joined the United States. The nation more than doubled in size. Moving on to the caption. This painting by artist John Gast is called American Progress. It was painted in 1872. The country is shown as a woman moving from the cities on the East Coast, past the Mississippi River, and heading toward the West Coast. But this destiny came at a price. Throughout the 1800s, thousands of American Indians were forced off the land that their people had lived on for hundreds of years. They were sent to live in special places set up by the government called reservations. Those who refused to leave faced the force of the U.S. Army. This is a sad chapter in U.S. history. Moving to the caption. Starting in 1838, the U.S. government sent thousands of American Indians from their homelands in the East to Oklahoma. This journey became known as the Trail of Tears. Building a new country. As the stories in this book have shown, life was hard for U.S. pioneer women. Life was hard for U.S. pioneer children. They had to work as hard as the American adults. They died young, but those who lived could be proud that they had helped build their country. Mapping migration. Most settlers followed one of these trails to the west. Traveling a well-known path made the trip safer. This map also shows the route American Indians in the east followed to reservations in the west. This path was called the Trail of Tears. Let's start with Laura Ingalls Wilder. The Ingalls family lived in many different places throughout the Midwest. As an adult, Laura Ingalls Wilder wrote about their experiences in books that are still popular today. John McWilliams. John McWilliams headed west to California in search of gold. While he didn't make his fortune, he had plenty of adventures. George Staples. George Staples' journey to the Salt Lake Valley was interrupted by the time he spent living with the Sioux. He remained friendly with local Indian tribes for the rest of his life. Ruth Chrisman. The Homestead Act allowed women such as Ruth Chrisman and her sisters to own their own land on the American prairie. These women rode horses and battled the elements right alongside men. And you can see the different paths that were taken here. All right, let's go to the next page. And here we just see the glossary. So we had referenced the glossary before, and we know that any word that appeared in bold during our readings can be found in the glossary here as well. So here are some of the definitions that came up at some point or another in the text. So if you were wondering about any of those, you can find them right over here. And then Find Out More just provides you with more websites and books and places to visit that tell you more about the journey west and how homesteading and pioneers found their way to the West Coast. All right, now that we've done our reading, let's go ahead and go over our close reading questions. So first, what connections can you make between the painting on page 26 and the idea of the nation's fate, or manifest destiny? So we see the painting right here on page 26, and we see that the caption says, "This painting by artist John Gast is called American Progress. It was painted in 1872. The country is shown as a woman moving from the cities on the East Coast, which you can kind of see way off out here in the distance, past the Mississippi River, you see the Mississippi River right here, and heading toward the West Coast." So we're thinking about the connections we can make between this painting and the idea of the nation's fate. And so it seems like she's destined to kind of keep moving west past the Rockies that you see here and heading to the ocean, Pacific Ocean, on the West Coast. And so I can kind of see how manifest destiny is portrayed here as American progress, or as this woman who's moving across the country, kind of like it seems to be her fate to move across the country. And then, what connection can you make between the painting and the pioneer stories in the rest of the book? So in all of the pioneer stories, they were moving west, right? And some of them took wagons, which I can see here in the painting, and many rode horses, and some encountered Native Americans, which we can also see. And then we see them also plowing fields, establishing their homestead. So there's a lot of elements of this that we can see portrayed in the book as well. And then our second close reading question is, what is the price of manifest destiny? And we saw this on the very next page, on page 27. We saw how, as a nation, we moved many of the Native American populations in our country to reservations. And many of these we can see in the caption here. Starting in 1838, the U.S. government sent thousands of American Indians from their homelands in the east to Oklahoma. This journey became known as the Trail of Tears. And it was known as that because it was full of hardships. It was full of really, really horrible things that happened to the Native American population in our country. And we removed these people from their lands, which were rightfully theirs, and we established our country there instead. So that's something that's happened a lot over the history of the world, but it's something that certainly happened in our country as well. So what does the painting on page 27 tell you about this chapter in U.S. history? So I think it tells you that it was full of a lot of different elements. It was full of people who had a lot of hope for their future as they moved into the West and started their homesteads and everything else. But it was also full of a lot of really horrible things like the Trail of Tears. So it was a huge mix of situations for people depending on who they were and what rights they had within our community. And then last, What connections can you make between the painting on page 26 and the painting on page 27? And I've put them right next to each other here. And I think we've kind of gone over this to some extent, but really I think the connection that they want us to make with this book is the fact that there was westward progress happening. There was this American progress. There was this manifest destiny that was going on one hand. But on the other hand, there was also these Native American populations that were being removed from their lands that they had lived on for hundreds of years. And so there was this unfortunate clashing of different communities. And that is kind of a lot of the history of how our nation was born, and definitely how it moved westward to the West Coast. So let's head into vocabulary. So first we have destiny, and destiny came up on page 26. In 1845, a U.S. magazine writer said it was his country's manifest destiny, or fate, to stretch from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And this is what we talked about throughout our close reading, right? The spread westward. So destiny, though, when we're thinking about what destiny means, we think about maybe fate. That's what came up right here in the reading, fate. And we can take from context clues a lot of times to help us figure out the definition. So that's a context clue. Or future events. So destiny can just be the future events that are bound to happen according to some belief. And then we also have fortune. Fortune has come up before. When we talked about fortune previously in our vocabulary, we were talking about fortune in the form of wealth or a large amount of money. But we also mentioned how fortune can reference the future. And so that's kind of how fortune ties in here as well, because destiny is talking all about the future. So for our definition, let's go ahead and say destiny is the events that will happen to someone in the future. And then for progress, we have heading towards a goal, moving forward, advancement, or development. And sorry, I forgot to read the bit from the text, so let's go back up here. It appeared in the caption on page 26, where it said, "This painting by artist John Gast is called American Progress. It was painted in 1872. The country is shown as a woman moving from the cities on the East Coast past the Mississippi River and heading toward the West Coast." So in this case, progress is that movement towards a goal, and the goal is getting to the West Coast and the Pacific Ocean. And so it ties into that idea of manifest destiny that we just went over. But in general, let's go ahead and say progress is moving forward toward a goal or destination. So it's all about moving forward or moving toward a goal or destination. So for to do, let's go ahead and say the first activity is going to be the usual. Just use each vocabulary word in a sentence. Those were destiny and progress. And then 2, respond to the following prompt. So it says reread pages 26 to 27 of Pioneers to the West, and then write a paragraph that describes the connection between manifest destiny, which was that idea of getting to the West Coast, and the Trail of Tears, which was the unfortunate removal of Native Americans from their native lands and movement towards their reservation in Oklahoma. So use evidence from the text to support your answer. And so that's a lot of what we had already talked about in the video. So just put your opinion on it and your idea of that connection and how those two events were intertwined. All right, thanks, class. Bye.